No one laughed out loud. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it came in smaller forms. A smirk that disappeared quickly. A glance exchanged between two musicians. The kind of quiet reaction meant to be seen, not heard. Prince noticed all of it. He was standing near the center of the rehearsal room, guitar hanging low against his body, waiting. The room itself was impressive in a restrained way. High ceilings, polished wood floors, walls lined with framed photographs of people who had already earned their place in music history. This was not a casual space. It was where reputations were tested. Across the room stood the guitarist. Legendary wasn't a word people used lightly around here. Decades of acclaim had shaped the way he carried himself. Relaxed shoulders, confident hands, the assurance of someone who had never needed to explain why he belonged. He looked at Prince, then at the other musicians. "So," he said casually, almost kindly, "let's hear what you've got." The way he said it mattered. It wasn't an invitation. It was a setup. Prince didn't respond immediately. He adjusted the strap on his guitar instead, eyes lowered, movements unhurried. He had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than defense ever could. The guitarist continued, smiling faintly. Play something real. Something everyone here understands." A few people shifted in their seats. This was the moment. The kind of moment musicians recognized instantly, but pretended not to. The line between curiosity and challenge. Between respect and quiet humiliation. Prince looked up, not at the guitarist, at the room. He scanned it slowly, meeting no one's eyes for too long. He wasn't searching for approval. He was measuring the space, its patience, its tension, its willingness to listen. He spoke calmly. "All right." That was all. No explanation. No disclaimer. Prince stepped forward and took a seat on the stool that had been left slightly off-center, as if no one had expected him to use it. He rested the guitar against his leg, but didn't play yet. The legendary guitarist leaned back, arms crossed. Waiting, Prince placed his fingers on the strings. Then he stopped, just for a moment. The room grew quieter, not because people were being polite, but because something had shifted. Anticipation replaced judgment. Even the guitarist's smile tightened, just slightly. Prince began to play. Not fast, not loud. The opening notes were simple, deliberate, almost restrained. The kind of phrasing that didn't try to impress anyone who wasn't listening closely. A few musicians exchanged looks. This wasn't what they expected. There was no flash yet. No obvious display of virtuosity. The guitarist raised an eyebrow. Prince kept going. Gradually, the melody changed. Not dramatically. It deepened. Small variations appeared, woven so subtly they were almost invisible unless you were paying attention. Someone leaned forward. Another musician stopped tapping their foot. Prince wasn't performing at them. He was playing through the room, letting the sound settle before adding anything else. Every note had space around it. Every pause felt intentional. The legendary guitarist uncrossed his arms. Prince shifted keys without warning. The change was gentle but unmistakable. What had sounded familiar now felt personal. Risky. Exposed. This was no longer about technique. It was about control. The guitarist glanced around, checking reactions. The room wasn't reacting the way it usually did. No nods of approval yet. No polite smiles. Just focus. Prince's hands moved with quiet precision. Not rushing. Not showing off. He let the music breathe, then tightened it again, guiding the tension exactly where he wanted it. A mistake here would have been obvious. There wasn't one. The guitarist straightened slightly. Prince introduced a new phrase. Unexpected, unresolved. It hung in the air longer than comfort allowed. A few people held their breath without realizing it. Then Prince resolved it. Softly. Perfectly. Someone exhaled. The guitarist's expression changed. Not shock. Not admiration. Recognition. Prince finished the phrase and let the final note fade naturally. He didn't cut it off. He didn't look up immediately. He waited. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. No one moved. No one spoke. The legendary guitarist finally cleared his throat. He began, then stopped. Prince looked up at him. Calm, open, unchallenging. The guitarist searched for the right word and didn't find it. Prince stood, adjusted the guitar strap again, and stepped back from the stool as if nothing unusual had happened. That was when the room understood. This hadn't been a response fueled by ego. It hadn't been an attempt to dominate. It had been something far more unsettling. Control. And the guitarist knew it. If you're still watching, notice this carefully. Prince didn't win the room by proving anyone wrong. He won it by refusing to play the game they set for him. And that was only the beginning. The silence didn't break all at once. It fractured. First, a chair shifted slightly. Then someone cleared their throat. Finally, a quiet breath escaped from the back of the room, as if the space itself had been holding it in. Prince stepped away from the stool and stood near the wall, guitar still resting against his body. He didn't look for reactions. He didn't scan faces. He waited. That was important, because the room needed time to understand what had just happened. The legendary guitarist was the first to move with intention. He took a step forward, then stopped. For a moment, it looked like he might say something dismissive, some light comment to regain control. A joke, perhaps. Something casual enough to restore the hierarchy everyone had arrived with. But he didn't. He looked at Prince instead. Really looked. What was that progression? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. Prince considered the question. Which part? The guitarist paused. The answer wasn't defiant. It wasn't clever. It was precise. And precision was harder to dismiss than confidence. The middle section, the guitarist said. Right before the shift. Prince nodded slowly. It's not written. That answer landed differently. A few musicians exchanged glances. Unwritten didn't mean improvised carelessly. It meant lived in. It meant internalized. So you were just feeling it? The guitarist asked, half testing, half guarded. Prince shook his head gently. No, I knew exactly where it was going. The guitarist studied him. But you didn't force it. Prince smiled faintly. There was no need. That was the moment when the balance tipped, not loudly, not visibly, but unmistakably. The guitarist took a breath and laughed softly, not out of mockery, but recognition. Most people would have tried to show me something, he said. Prince met his eyes. I wasn't playing for you. The words were calm, respectful, and far more powerful than confrontation. The guitarist nodded once. Fair. That single word carried weight. Around them, the room began to loosen. Conversations didn't start yet, but postures changed. People leaned forward instead of back. Instruments that had been resting quietly were adjusted, tuned, brought closer. Someone near the window said, Can we hear that again? Prince didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the guitarist. Not for permission, for alignment. The guitarist hesitated only a second. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the stool. Go ahead. Prince returned to it, sat and began again, but this time differently. Not better, not louder, more open. He played the same idea, but left space where the others could enter. A bassist joined carefully, then more confidently. A drummer added texture instead of rhythm. The guitarist listened, fingers hovering over his strings, unsure when to step in. Prince noticed. He shifted the harmony slightly, just enough to invite, not demand. The guitarist joined, not leading, following. No one said anything about it, but everyone felt it. This was no longer a test. It was a collaboration. The music grew slowly, organically. Prince never lost control, but he didn't hold it tightly either. He guided without gripping, redirected without interrupting. When the piece ended this time, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense. It was settled. The guitarist exhaled and smiled openly now. You know, he said, shaking his head, I thought I was going to have to teach you something today. Prince stood and set his guitar aside carefully. Maybe you did. The guitarist laughed again, this time louder. Maybe, but his eyes said something else. They said he'd been reminded of something. The rehearsal didn't continue much longer after that. It didn't need to. The point had been made, not verbally, not theatrically, but conclusively. As people packed up their instruments, conversations began in earnest. Quiet praise, curious questions, subtle recalibrations of perception. Prince answered what was asked. Nothing more. At one point, a younger guitarist approached him hesitantly. "I've watched him for years," he said, nodding toward the legend. "I didn't think anyone could, you know." Prince waited. "Stand there like that," the young guitarist finished. Prince considered this. "He stood where he needed to," he said. "So did I." The young guitarist frowned slightly, thinking, then nodded. Later, as Prince was preparing to leave, the legendary guitarist caught up with him near the door. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. Prince looked at him. "Do what?" "Make it clear," the guitarist replied. Prince shrugged lightly. "I didn't make anything clear. I just played." The guitarist studied him for a long moment. "That's the difference," he said. "Most people play to prove something." Prince opened the door. "Then they're not listening to themselves." The guitarist smiled, not defensively this time. "You know," he said, "people are going to talk about this." Prince nodded. "They always do. But this," the guitarist added, "this will travel." Prince paused, hand on the door. "That's fine." He stepped out into the hallway, leaving the room behind him. Inside, conversations continued. Stories began forming, already changing shape as they passed from person to person. Outside, Prince walked toward the elevator, unhurried. He hadn't come to win anything. He hadn't come to correct anyone. He had come prepared. And preparation, when it's quiet enough, speaks for itself. If you're still here, watching this unfold, understand this clearly. Humiliation only works if you accept the terms. Prince never did. He changed the terms by refusing to acknowledge them at all. And that was why the response shocked them. The story didn't leave the room immediately. It lingered. Moments like that always did. They stayed suspended between what had happened and what people were willing to admit had happened. Everyone who had been there knew something had shifted, but no one rushed to name it. That hesitation mattered. By the next day, fragments began moving on their own. A phone call that lasted longer than planned. A rehearsal that started with a different tone. A sentence that began with, "You know who surprised me?" Prince was nowhere near any of it. He was in a small studio across town, one he'd used for years. No plaque on the wall, no mythology attached to it. Just familiar equipment and the quiet comfort of a space that didn't need to impress anyone. He arrived alone. Prince always liked to arrive alone. It gave the room time to accept him without witnesses. He set his guitar down and sat on the floor, back against the wall. For a while, he didn't play. He listened to the building, the low hum of electricity, the distant traffic, the faint echo of another musician rehearsing somewhere far below. That rehearsal room was already changing, even if it didn't know it yet. Later that afternoon, a call came in from someone Prince hadn't expected to hear from so soon. A producer, not an excited one, a careful one. "I heard something interesting," the producer said after a brief exchange of pleasantries. Prince waited. "They said you didn't say much." Prince smiled faintly. "I usually don't." There was a pause. "They also said no one could quite explain what you did." Prince didn't respond. "That's not a complaint," the producer added. "It's just unusual." Prince leaned his head back against the wall. "Music doesn't need explaining," he said. "It needs space." The producer exhaled softly, as if considering something. "We're putting together a small session next week," he said. Very controlled, very particular. Prince understood what that meant. Rooms like that were built to test limits without admitting it. "I'll think about it," Prince said. After the call ended, he finally picked up the guitar. He didn't replay what had happened. He never did. Repeating moments like that dulled them. Instead, he worked through something new, unformed, imperfect, unfinished. That was where he preferred to stay. Meanwhile, back in the rehearsal space, the legendary guitarist sat alone longer than usual after everyone had left. He hadn't planned to. He rested his instrument against the chair and stared at the empty stool where Prince had sat. Not with resentment, with memory. He'd seen that look before. Years ago, in himself. That unsettled him more than anything else. At the next rehearsal, he caught himself listening differently, not just to others, but to his own playing. He paused more, forced less, let phrases resolve instead of chasing them. Someone noticed. Sounding different today, a bandmate said casually. The guitarist nodded. Trying something. He didn't say what. He didn't need to. By the time Prince declined the producer's invitation, politely, without explanation, the interest had already outgrown the event itself. People weren't asking what he'd played anymore. They were asking how he'd played, and that question was harder to dismiss. A few days later, Prince attended another rehearsal, not as a guest, not as a feature, just as a musician among others. There was no challenge this time, no test waiting to happen. Still, the room felt different when he entered. Conversations lowered slightly, not out of fear, out of awareness. Prince took a seat near the back and listened. A guitarist struggled through a passage, stopping repeatedly to correct himself. Each restart came with a little more tension. The room tightened around it. Prince didn't intervene. Eventually, the guitarist sighed. I can't get it to sound right. Prince spoke without standing. What are you listening for? The guitarist blinked. What do you mean? When you play it, Prince said. What are you trying to hear? The guitarist hesitated. I don't know. I guess the right version. Prince nodded. That's why it keeps slipping away. Silence followed. Prince didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. The guitarist tried again, this time slower. Less correction, more listening. The phrase settled. Not perfect, but honest. Prince smiled slightly and looked away. That was his pattern. He never stayed in moments long enough for them to become about him. Later, as the session wrapped up, someone asked quietly, Do you always play like that? Prince considered the question. Like what? Like you don't need to win, they said. Prince shrugged. Winning's loud. They nodded, understanding something they hadn't known how to name before. By the end of the week, the story had grown. Not exaggerated. Refined. Details dropped away. What remained was simple. A legendary guitarist had tried to put Prince in his place. Prince hadn't resisted. He hadn't argued. He hadn't impressed. He had listened. And somehow, that had changed everything. If you're still here, watching this unfold, notice what didn't happen. There was no public confrontation, no speech, no declaration of superiority. Just a quiet moment where control passed hands without being grabbed. That's the kind of thing people remember, even when they can't explain why. And it was already reshaping rooms Prince would never step into. By the time the story reached people who hadn't been in the room, it no longer sounded like a challenge. It sounded like a lesson, not the kind written down, the kind absorbed accidentally, while watching someone else realize they'd been listening the wrong way for years. Prince noticed the shift in smaller things. Phone calls that used to start with explanations now started with pauses. Invitations that once framed him as an experiment now treated him as a constant. He was no longer the question. He was the reference point. That kind of change made people uncomfortable, especially those who had built their authority on certainty. At another rehearsal space, larger this time, brighter, Prince arrived as a guest. No introduction beyond his name. No emphasis. No build-up. Still, when he walked in, the room aligned itself. Not physically, psychologically. Musicians adjusted their posture. Conversation slowed. Someone stopped tuning and waited, as if unsure whether continuing would be disrespectful. Prince noticed and spoke immediately. Please, he said calmly. Don't stop. They resumed. This mattered to him. He didn't want reverence. Reverence distorted listening. The session began with a complex piece, technically demanding, meticulously arranged. Everyone played it correctly, perfectly even, but something was missing. Prince listened without interrupting. When the piece ended, the conductor looked toward him instinctively, then seemed surprised by the reflex. Well, the conductor asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Prince didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the center of the room, and looked at the score resting on the stand. He didn't touch it. Can you play it again, he asked, but without trying to prove you know it? The conductor frowned slightly. What does that mean? Prince met his eyes. It means play it like no one's watching. The request unsettled them. That was the point. They played again. This time, the music shifted. Not cleaner, not tighter, more human. A few notes bent slightly. Some entrances breathed instead of snapped. The structure remained intact, but the tension softened. Prince nodded once. That, he said quietly, is where the music lives. No applause followed. No one expected it. The conductor exhaled slowly. You know, he said, almost to himself, we spend years trying to eliminate uncertainty. Prince looked around the room. Then we wonder why it sounds empty. That sentence stayed with them. Later, after the session ended, the legendary guitarist, now fully aware of how the story had traveled, approached Prince again. This time, there was no edge at all. I owe you something, he said. Prince raised an eyebrow slightly. You don't. The guitarist smiled. Maybe not, but I needed reminding. Prince waited. I forgot what it felt like, the guitarist continued, to trust silence. Prince nodded. Silence tells you when to stop talking. They stood there for a moment, not as rivals, not as symbols, just as musicians who understood something they hadn't before. As Prince prepared to leave, someone asked him quietly, do you ever get tired of being underestimated? Prince considered the question seriously. No, he said. It keeps rooms honest. Outside, the evening air was cool. Prince walked alone, unhurried, unburdened by the weight of reputation that others were now placing on him. He didn't carry moments like that forward. He let them settle where they belonged. Because power, real power, wasn't about being recognized. It was about being undeniable without insisting on it. If you're still watching, understand this. Humiliation fails when the person being tested refuses to perform insecurity. Prince didn't resist the moment. He absorbed it, and by doing so, he left nothing for anyone else to hold against him. Only one part remains.